Welcome back if you were with us this morning, and if you were not with us this morning, welcome, period, to the second half of our 360 symposium dedicated to the nature of ARP. This morning, we heard papers from our three catalog authors, and this afternoon we're having two speakers followed by a panel discussion, and the speakers are contributing papers on other aspects of ARP's nature that seem to me very important to include a consideration of as well. Our first speaker is Emily Hamilton. Emily is the Associate Objects Conservator at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. She holds an MA in Conservation from Buffalo State College and a BA in Art History from Reed College. Before joining SF MoMA, she worked at the Museum of Modern Art, New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the St. Louis Art Museum, and in archaeological excavations in Italy and Turkey. She has lectured and published internationally about issues in contemporary art conservation. She accompanied SF MoMA's loans to the Nasher as a courier over a week ago, and we are happy to welcome her back. Emily will be presenting her research into a fascinating issue, the surfaces of ARP's sculptures. Emily?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Catherine, for the invitation to speak at the symposium. Can you hear me in the back clearly? Okay. This exhibition has provided the impetus for a major collaborative research project at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. As a conservator, I am charged with the material care of artworks, many of which have changed in appearance since they were first created. This may happen because the artist intended for there to be variation as part of the concept, because the materials have shifted with age, or, in the case of ARP's metal sculptures, due to the way that they've been treated by art dealers or owners throughout their histories. Caring for works of art often involves trying to understand these kinds of changes, and in many cases, this includes grappling with the actions of past caretakers. Today, I'll focus on our understanding and treatment of this sculpture, Human Concretion, on view in the exhibition. It is shown here at three different moments over the past 20 years, each with a radically different appearance, and I will share how that came to be. In preparation for loaning Human Concretion to this exhibition, we examined the work to ensure that it was in presentable condition. This served as the impetus to revisit our understanding of ARP's patinas, and we also examined related works in the collection. SF MoMA has three metal ARP sculptures: Human Concretion, Threshold with Plant Crenellations, and Dachshund Doll. When they first came into the collection, all three had polished surfaces. Their shiny appearance was maintained until the late 1990s, when a better understanding of ARP's practices emerged. Research by curator Valerie Fletcher and conservator Martha Singer, a former SF MoMA fellow, revealed that his sculptures were often intentionally patinated to make the surfaces less reflective. Fletcher and Singer did extensive archival research and also interviewed key figures that worked closely with ARP. When their research became known, SF MoMA conservators stopped polishing the sculptures and allowed them to slowly oxidize. This was a step in the right direction, but the works required interventive treatment to fully address the issues. Nearly 20 years after their research came to light, this exhibition provided a key moment in confronting the histories of these objects and bringing their appearances closer to our understanding of ARP's preferences. To update the research, I worked closely with conservation and curatorial colleagues at SF MoMA and was also in dialogue with Catherine here at the Nasher, the Stiftung ARP, the Artist Foundation in Germany, and Hauser and Wirth, the gallery that now represents ARP, for their advice and guidance. So what is a patina? This term is often used in reference to the visual changes that occur naturally over time, the patina of age that gives a sense of an object's history, of use and care. In reference to metal sculptures, patina also refers to the intentionally applied chemicals that can alter the surface. These chemicals can be a range of things, often compounds containing sulfur, nitrates, or chlorides, and they produce a variety of colors and visual effects. And these are just a few examples of the wide range of patinas that you can see here at the Nasher. Patinas can be opaque or transparent, and they may be finished with waxes, oils, or other coatings to make the surfaces glossy or matte. When an artist is no longer living or available for consultation, the best resources for understanding their works are historical documentation, engagement with their studios or estates, and often consulting their other artworks. Unfortunately, early photographs and documentation of S.F. MoMA's 3 works are quite limited. However, as Fletcher and Singer found, surviving historical letters and their own interviews with the artist's former assistant and wife indicate that Arp did not like brightly polished surfaces for his sculptures. This was particularly true for the mid-size and larger works. As André Meunier, Arp's assistant from 1958 to 1966, described, Mr. Arp hated shiny sculptures. He hated that, because if it's shiny, you can't appreciate the form. It creates reflections. Arp's process typically involved creation of a plaster original, which would be sand cast in bronze or brass and patinated at a foundry. Some of his sculptures, including Human Concretion, were made in plaster in the 1930s, but not cast until later in the 1950s or 60s. In the early part of his career, casts were only made after a ready buyer was found, and during the Depression and World War II, access to metals for use in art was limited. Perhaps because of these restrictions and delays, the plaster forms were very important to Arp. Through conversations with Catherine, I learned that he would have sometimes reworked them over time, creating new works from old ones, as you can see in the lower level of this exhibition. Once the metal casts were fabricated, Arp's preferred patinas were silky, thin, and slowly built up through a cold patination process. There's a fair amount of variation amongst his known original patinas. Some can be reddish brown or dark brown, others green over dark brown. This variation is partly explained by the composition of the metal alloy, which could vary significantly. The Roudier foundry, which was Arp's preferred foundry due to their high quality, tended to use an alloy that was high in copper that would produce a reddish appearance. Arp also worked with a number of other foundries during his lifetime, and the composition of their alloys varied, lending different effects. Another factor is differing environmental conditions, for instance, the extent of outdoor exposure. Arp often put his sculptures outside in his garden for the patina to weather, but the length of time could vary. It seems he wanted the surfaces to look mature, but not neglected. During Arp's lifetime, sculptures were maintained while outdoors so that they would not deteriorate, and Arp is known to have expressed a preference for pristine appearances in his other painted woodworks. No matter the color, Arp preferred thin patinas that allowed the tone of the metal to come through, giving a sense of it as a material. In an interview in 2001, André Meunier, Arp's assistant, described the technique for patination. He would use a stone from the city of Barège, if I can pronounce that correctly, a small town in the Pyrenees known for its mineral baths. The sulfurous stone was dissolved in water, and the solution was diluted until it became a dark brown color. The solution was applied using a cotton cloth, and the sculpture would be coated with wax or shoe polish. An exception to these thin, light patinas was necessary for works with casting flaws in order to cover up small plugs or pitting. Quality varied between the different foundries, necessitating darker patinas on some casts, where a lighter patina would be suitable for others. The Roudier foundry is thought to have intentionally created some variation with multiple thin layers of different hues that lend an incredibly beautiful finish. Although art preferred a less reflective patina, the tastes of the American market ultimately shaped the appearance of his works. By the mid-20th century, many American clients had expressed a desire for a more modern look, in part inspired by the popularity of Brancusi's gleaming works. This led dealers to polish Arp sculptures to meet popular demand. At least two dealers, Edward Loeb and Madeleine Chalette, are reported to have polished his works with steel Brillo pads and kitchen cleanser. To do so evenly would take considerable effort, and given the number of polished sculptures, it's also possible that some never had an applied patina. To our knowledge, at least one sculpture was sold before Arp's death in 1966 without the application of a chemical patina, even though we suspect the artist would have vigorously objected. In a 1962 letter to a gallery regarding an imminent sale, Arp's second wife, Marguerite Hagenbach Arp, wrote, "The sculpture has a high polish, as your client seems to wish it, which we find atrocious, and which Arp has not seen. He would get furious, but Francois wanted to fulfill your wish, and so I close my eyes, because unfortunately I know that other American collectors themselves destroy our carefully created patinas with a mirror type." So, quite clear. This comment indicates that not only were the artist's clearly stated preferences sometimes disregarded, but he was at times intentionally kept in the dark when unpatinated works were sold. It is unclear to what extent Arp inspected works after casting. It's common practice for an artist to inspect the first one or two casts in an edition and then delegate management to the foundry. Given the volume of works produced in the 50s and 60s, he likely did not inspect them all personally. Casts of his works were also made posthumously, and the practice of selling highly polished casts may have continued after his death. S.F. MoMA's Human Concretion is the second cast in an edition of 3 and was made by the Sousa Foundry. In addition to consulting previous research and the historical record, I also examined 2 other casts of the same sculpture in Germany and Switzerland that still have their original patinas. Both were largely consistent in appearance, with dark but thin patinas that reveal the tone of the metal underneath. They both have texture and wear consistent with outdoor exposure. This consistency clarified our sense of what the patina should look like, supporting the case for repatination. And to clarify, this is what the sculpture looked like after not being polished for about 10 years, but before the repatination process. Our sculpture itself also provided clues that it would have had an applied patina. The sculpture has a number of casting artifacts and flaws that would have been covered up by a patina. Casts by the Sousa Foundry are often of poorer quality than some of the other foundries that Arp worked with, and if this work did not have an applied patina, it would have had highly visible imperfections. After much discussion, we decided to repatinate the sculpture prior to this exhibition. Repatination is a major intervention, and it's fairly unusual for a museum to undertake, particularly for indoor sculptures. Identifying a skilled patineur was an essential step, as we needed a partner in this project with the thoughtfulness and flexibility in addition to technical skills. We decided to work with the Walla Walla Foundry in Washington State, as they are renowned for working collaboratively with artists to produce very fine quality works. This spring, the sculpture traveled to Walla Walla for treatment. Michelle Barger, our head of SF MoMA Conservation, worked closely with Jeremy Lilwall, the patineur, to guide the creation of a new patina. Contemporary patineurs no longer apply patinas in the same way that Mounier did with his washes of dissolved stone, so we needed to do some testing to find the right method. Lilwall made samples of different processes on several bronze tiles, allowing for review and discussion before working on the actual sculpture. Using contemporary working methods, he created an appearance that we think is very close to Arp's preferences. This process involved several steps. Before applying the patina, preparation of the surfaces and the form was necessary. The process would involve a substantial amount of heat, and since there was no hole into the interior of the larger element, Lilwall recommended drilling a weep hole to relieve steam that could build up in the interior, and this was essential to keep the sculpture safe while we were working on it. An 1/8 of an inch hole was drilled into the bottom of the element in one of the 3 areas where it rests on the display surface. Because the sculpture had been incorrectly polished for decades, the metal surface had a burnished quality with no tooth or texture, which is necessary for chemical patinas to bond successfully. Though conservators would generally advocate for minimal alteration of the surfaces, we needed to find a balance so that the patination would be successful. To recreate the surface texture, the sculpture was blasted with brown fused alumina. The entire surface was evenly buffed by hand using a 3M Scotch-Brite pad. In order to recreate the thinner areas that are characteristic of wear in an aged patina, high points on the sculptural surface were further buffed with the same type of pad attached to a rotary tool. Chemicals are less likely to bite into these smoother surfaces, rendering a thinner patina in those areas. The sculpture was made wet with water, and a solution of potash, also known as liver of sulfur, was sprayed onto the surface. Layering with applications of chemicals, heat, and water, the patina was built up until it was dark brown. Once cooled, the loosely attached dark layer was sloughed off with a slurry of brown fused alumina and water applied by hand. Fine steel wool was used to preferentially reduce the density in certain areas, exposing more of the underlying bronze. The surface was thoroughly rinsed with water and dried with compressed air. Traces of moisture were driven out with a torch, and then an initial layer of clear wax was applied. Additional wax was added to areas of greater porosity to achieve a uniform layer of wax on the surface. Once cooled, additional layers of paste wax were worked onto the surface, resulting in the desired satin finish. The results make it possible to see the form clearly and still see the tone of the metal underneath. We also repatinated our other 2 Arp metal sculptures, and each presented slightly different questions. We actually decided to treat Doxandall first due to the relative simplicity of its form and its small size. It was originally made at the Godard foundry in Paris and is the first cast in an edition of 3. However, unlike human concretion, we could not find clear comparative examples of other casts with their original patina intact. This made our decision-making process more complex, as a range of patina tones are found on Arp's works. Knowing that the patinas on some of Arp's other small sculptures can be in the lighter range, we decided to make Doxandall slightly lighter than human concretion. Similar to human concretion, it was kept thin so that the tone of the metal comes through. Finally, a threshold with plant crenellations was treated in a slightly different way due to its construction. This sculpture is the 3rd cast in an edition of 5 fabricated by Meunier. It consists of sheets of metal that are soldered together, so it could not be heated as this would release the joins. A cold patination process was instead pursued, creating different challenges of how to bond the patina chemical to the metal. We strove to match the patina to historical photos taken in Arp's garden of other sheet metal works. And at right is patineur Jeremy Lilwall with SF MoMA's head conservator Michelle Barger, enjoying a moment after completion of a series of very challenging projects. At long last, these works appear the way that we think Arp would have wanted, and we're delighted that human concretion could be included in this exhibition. Though we believe we made the correct decisions for the works in SF MoMA's collection, other works may have additional factors. It is not clear that all works should be patinated. Small forms are not generally as obscured by reflections as large forms, and it may still be possible to see the form clearly. If a larger work clearly never had an original patina, even despite Arp's preference otherwise, it may be appropriate to leave it unpatinated. In other cases, some works are so well known to their audiences in a polished state that public preferences should be taken into account. What is striking at the completion of this project is that for an artist with the stature that Arp has, there are still a number of unknowns about his practices and preferences. As caretakers, making decisions requires grappling with a historical record that remains incomplete. This exhibition has provided a remarkable opportunity for focused study and discussion, and we're grateful to Catherine, the Stiftung Arp, and Hauser and Wirth for their ongoing engagement in caring for the Arp works, both in SF MoMA's collection and beyond. Thank you.
Do we have any questions?
You know, one of the principles, say in painting conservation, is to have reversibility of your actions. And just listening to this, it sounds like that you've gone a different path, that these decisions you've made are firmly irreversible in the future. Do you agree?
Well, I think the concept of reversibility, even in paintings conservation, it's a tricky concept, because if you think about it, once you clean a painting, you can't put the dirt back. And once you take off the old varnish, you can't put that back either. So it's not a pure concept from a starting point. As conservators are trained now, retreatability is really the key word that we go back to, in that you choose to use materials that will be easy to undo later, thoroughly document the process, that kind of thing. But the word fully reversible is a little challenging. I would say in this case, should we ever decide that the sculptures should be shiny, which I don't know that we would, but should we ever decide that, they can be made shiny again. Of course, there will be some alteration to the metal surfaces through the process that we did. But in this case, we felt that the appearance that they had was so wrong that it would be inappropriate to show them in the untreated state. So.
Of course, going back to the painting and what reversibility is, when you're taking the varnish off, you're generally, given the age beyond it, you're generally not removing anything that the artist put on it. And when you're removing repainting that was done at some point in its lifespan, you're not removing the artist's work at all. You're trying to get down to a base of what's really left of the artist's work. I guess, do you think you removed any surface metals?
I think it would be extremely limited. Yeah, I think there was some abrasion to the surfaces, which, as I mentioned, generally conservators really try to avoid that kind of thing. But in order to make the patination effort successful, we kind of had to. And that was a point that we really spent some time on, and tried to minimize as much as possible. But in this case, the original surfaces were gone already, because the pieces had been polished for years. And every time you polish a piece, you do lose some of the original material. So it's not the case of altering an original surface. It's almost trying to get back to the original appearance through the treatment, if that clarifies.
How far in the future conservators might think this needs to be treated again?
Well, hopefully not. I mean, I would imagine the wax on the surface may need to be buffed from time to time. But since we don't display these pieces outdoors, I don't think it's likely that they would be treated again. Not in this way, anyway. So.
Wanted to ask, since you've got 3 works by ARP that were made at 3 different foundries, and using a more contemporary patination process rather than this kind of system of mineral washes that ARP's assistant used, did you have to do research into material research into the composition of each different bronze to determine how it might react to those contemporary patination methods?
We did do quite a bit of testing, which was one of the more fascinating components of this project, actually, because we initially were trying to correspond with the Walla Walla foundry remotely, so just so they would have an idea of what we wanted. And so they would send us samples, and we'd evaluate it and hold it next to the sculpture and think, this isn't quite what we want. And then they'd go back and try again and try different things. So we now have a whole reference collection of what the various effects are that can be made with these different techniques. And the third piece, the sheet metal piece, is actually brass, and so that was again a different starting point. And the interesting thing to see was, even though we did all of this testing and preliminary work, the way that the actual metal of the pieces responds to the chemicals is quite an individual thing. So the patineur had a really good idea going into it of what to expect, but there were still some things that would only be learned from the piece itself. So, absolutely.
I was wondering if the one thing, the image that, at least to my eye, you didn't show that would have been interesting to see are photographs of the other 2 casts.
Oh, sure.
Because you said that you used them and that they were original. And to me, it would have been interesting to see them.
Sure. Yeah, I did think about that. These are quite challenging to photograph, and the second one in particular I saw in a storage facility, which, you have your overhead lighting, and so the photographs were just very poor quality. So I do appreciate that it's helpful to see those.
You mentioned that there were posthumous casts by the foundries. Were those authorized, and were those casts, the patina, consistent with the original works?
To be honest, I have been so focused on SF MoMA's pieces that I don't know that I can speak with as much authority as other people in this room could, but maybe that's a good subject for the panel discussion.
One more question.
So you showed an image of, I think, the sculpture being buffed, and it looked white. Can you explain what we're seeing there? Like, what causes it to look white at that moment in the production or the process?
It is really remarkable. They almost look like they're from the moon or something like that.
Like marble or
Exactly.
plaster.
I think what's happening is, with shiny surfaces, what you're getting is the reflection of light bouncing back to you. And when the surface is slightly abraded, even very, very finely abraded, light isn't bouncing in the same direction. So that's the difference, is that the light is just sort of dying when it's connecting with the surfaces.
So when you talk about like the underlying tone of the bronze, like, is there a moment when you do see just the bronze itself, or you know what I'm getting at?
I guess it's very easy to point out when you're looking at a sculpture. So as we spend more time with this exhibition, I think you can really see it when you know what you are looking for. You see the almost a coating over top, and then you can really see the tone of the metal. So maybe after this is done,
Yeah,
it's worth looking through.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.